Good morning and welcome to El Cupán. Oh, in a world of misjustice, injustice, and all sorts of justice, I want to tell you a story. This story consists of two brothers whose names were Kevin and Carl. They both lived in America, and according to The Guardian, in an article that they wrote last August, Kevin was eventually freed after 20 years for a crime that he did not commit. But the backstory to this is Kevin always claimed he never committed the crime, that he was always innocent. But no one was listening. No one would go and pay attention to what the man was saying. The one who was actually guilty of the murder was his brother Carl, and the issue was that they were identical twins. Now, Kevin ended up that he was protesting his innocence, as I said, the whole time. But no one would listen. And so they went and put him down for 54 years. He was going to jail for a crime that he didn't commit. Praise God, he is living in this century. Because he is seen eventually justice take place and himself being set free. Now, how did that justice come about? After 20 years, can you imagine? After 20 years, his brother finally confessed that he was the one who had committed the murder, because he couldn't live with his conscience. That was some conscience, that he could go and remain seared for that long and let his innocent brother just languish in jail for that length of time. But that's what he did. But that got me thinking about another story, a story about two Chinese brothers, and there was mistaken identity in that trial, but it was in a different time, in a different era. And what happened was that the wrong brother again was picked up for a murder that he did not commit. Went to trial. He was convicted of this murder. It ended up that he was sentenced to death. It ended up that he was put to death. But the difference in this story is the brother knew he was innocent, but he kept his mouth shut. He never said anything, because he knew that his brother was guilty. But there was one difference. The difference was that he was a Christian, his brother wasn't. And he knew that if his brother was to die that day for the murder that he had committed, he would end up going and facing a lost eternity. You see, our actions bring us to a lost eternity. I spoke about God's justice there a few weeks back in my cupán, and this is what we're talking about. Injustice, misjustice here, and justice. And so that brother, Chinese brother, I forget their names, he actually chose to die in place of the brother that had committed the crime, so that God somehow in his grace and mercy would reach out to his brother and save him. And maybe the reason we know that story is because that's exactly what happened. I can't remember what the outworking of the story was. But this gets me back to my being amazed by Jesus. And as I enter into the latter part of Mark's gospel, here is Jesus, and he's in argumentative confrontation with the Pharisees and the Sadducees and the teachers of the law. And it takes a turn after chapter 8 in the book. And it's all about the theological debates that Jesus is caught up in. Now he's arrested and he's brought along for trial, and he's in front of Pontius Pilate. And this is what really struck me as I was reading in chapter 15. It goes and says, the chief priests accused him of many things. So again Pilate asked him, aren't you going to answer? See how many things they're accusing you of. But Jesus still made no reply. And Pilate was amazed. You see, here was a man who was before the governor of the whole area and wasn't pleading his case. How often did that happen in Pontius Pilate's life? But then, in a bizarre twist of events, we move into misjustice taking place. And because Pilate wants to go and keep calm in the area, in the province, and trust me, it was very difficult for him to do that, because the Jewish people were a very troublesome people, according to the historians in regard to the Roman Empire. They were the ones who were always causing trouble. Everybody else just went and did what the Roman Empire wanted them to do. But these Jews, they were troublesome lot. And now he was afraid that they were going to call and kick off again. So he gives them a pick and choose type scenario. Okay, guys, here's Jesus. There's nothing wrong with him. I can't find no fault in him. But who do you want? Do you want Jesus Christ back? Or do you want Barabbas? Now, what's very interesting to me about this story is when you compare the two people, just like I've been comparing the two Chinese brothers, just as I've been comparing Kevin and Carl. Here you have Jesus Christ, someone who was performing miracles, someone who was healing the sick even, someone who was restoring people back to full health, mentally, physically, spiritually. And here was someone, a known murderer in Barabbas. But not only that, Barabbas was also an insurrectionist. He was someone who was actually a freedom fighter. He was someone who was a thorn in the side of the Roman Empire. He was someone who was causing rebellions to take place against Rome. Jesus Christ, on the other hand, is someone, when he was asked about giving taxes to Caesar, went and said, well, whose insignia is on the coin? Whose stamp is on it? And goes and says, well, give to Caesar what is Caesar's. And so he's actually saying, pay your taxes, while the other fellow is trying to go and set them all free by violence. And that's the other thing. Barabbas is someone who resorts to using violence to overcome his enemies. Well, Jesus speaks about love. And the way that he comes is not to bring condemnation, but peace. And then they cry for the freedom of Barabbas. And Jesus, as you know, was led to be crucified. But here's the thing. Barabbas represents you and me. Jesus Christ, in that moment, there is a physical demonstration taking place. One that we can see in real time. Of how a murderer, an insurrectionist, a violent person is set free. Not because of Pilate, but because of the grace and mercy of a silent Jesus. Isn't that interesting? I find that amazing. The old hymn goes and says, he could have called 10,000 angels to destroy the world and set him free. He could have called 10,000 angels, but he died alone for you and me. Due to Jesus' silence, Barabbas walked free. Due to Jesus' silence, do you know what? You and me, we also walk free. Interesting, don't you think? Pilate's not the only one amazed by this story. I am amazed too. But what about you?